Not? There we go. It's been a wonderful time to just be able to fellowship together. Thanks for everyone who's worked with the food and the drink and stuff. It's awesome to share more than a moment before and everything. Why don't we just quickly become aware of the God that's closer to us than what we are to ourselves? Why don't you just take a big breath in? Become aware of eyes of favor and adoration. It's turned on you. Thank you, Abba. Thank you, Papa. You are so close that you're so ready to reveal yourself. Woo. Thank you. Now we started, there's so many good things that we've been saying over the past few days. I remember things as we went through the few days and wanted to pick up on a number of them to bring them together into the session. But one of the things that we started off with on Sunday was to realize that our language points to a reality greater than itself, that it creates an atmosphere in which we can experience a God who is not enclosed by our language. And that we participate in an experience much larger than ourselves. You know, we had this wonderful realization that God's not out there somewhere, that He's made His home within me. But I want to take us even further, and that's to realize that God is not enclosed within you, that He lives life through you, and that we are participating in an experience larger than ourselves. And I want to start off by speaking about language, the very way in which language developed, the way in which we use it, how it's related to the events in our lives, how it's related to our beliefs, to the stories that we tell ourselves, and how it is related to this God that overwhelms us with Himself. Now, the human story is enormous. I mean, the few years that you've been conscious and that you've lived on this planet is a fraction of the human story. And for us to get to grips just with what's happening in our own lives is sometimes overwhelming. To start contemplating the origins of all of humanity and the story that's been told up to this point is kind of pushing the limits of what is possible for the human mind to do. And language... I mean, this story that we participate in had moments of indescribable beauty, but it also has moments of great pain and suffering and chaos, and it almost seems like evil is as real as good, and the chaos is as real as the story. But are they? See, since time began, mankind has stood in awe at the beauty and the wonder and the size of this creation that we're involved in. We somehow became aware that there is meaning beyond the visible, that there is a story in the midst of this chaos, that there is a treasure beyond what is just tangible. And unlike animals who will, when they've fulfilled their basic needs, when they've eaten, they've drunk, their thirst is quenched, they've found shelter, when they satisfied their most basic needs, they satisfied and they lie down and wait until they're hungry again. But mankind has an appetite that drives us way beyond the normal needs. We will dig tunnels through mountains. We will send spacecraft into as far as we can. We will peer into the very nature of what makes reality what it is. We have an appetite for meaning way beyond any other creature. It's part of our reflective nature. And you know, some of the great apes have been taught the meaning of words. So many of the great apes know that APPLE refers to that little red fruit that it wants to eat. And some of them have been taught hundreds of different words, enough words that can make a person conversant. But none of them could be taught the meaning of "you are the apple of my eye." You see, there's an excess of meaning that is unique to our reflective nature. And I want to delve into that. Now, some of the earliest human experiences that were overwhelming were the forces of nature. The fact that we were at the absolute mercy of the droughts, the storms, the floods that came and overwhelmed our societies. And so some of the earliest concepts that started being developed is monsters of chaos. We heard about the Enuma Elish myth a little while ago, how Tiamat and Apsu were the male and female personifications of the waters of chaos, the salt water and the sweet water. And, you know, in Syrian mythology, it was Litan, I think was the name of the monster. It's the equivalent of the biblical Leviathan. There are sea monsters of chaos. Now, whether it was the formless nature of water, or whether it was the fact that the vast majority of the seas were unexplored and unknown and therefore scary, it made it such an apt picture of this overwhelming sense of something much larger than us that will overwhelm us. But before natural disasters gave us that idea, I think, and what I want to propose is that the original monster of chaos is when humanity started trying to give meaning to all these events, all these things that happen. In the midst of this chaos, do we have meaning? Do we have a destiny? Do we have purpose? And in the overload of information, and in our attempt to try and give meaning to all of this data, the original monster of chaos appeared, which is confusion, which we don't know what to do with all of this information coming. Have you ever worked with photographic software where you would take a nice picture, and today's computers are so amazing, you can apply any effect and it does it quickly. But a few years ago, you'll remember if you tried to apply an effect to a photo, it was really power hungry. It took a while to put the new effect onto the raw data that was given it. And eventually you'll manipulate this picture to produce what your vision is of what it should look like. Now, you are the camera, the processing power, the software, the sound engineer, and the final movie of your own life. You continually process raw data that's being given to you. It comes from every side. It comes consciously and unconsciously. And your contemplative nature means that you are consistently applying effects to the information that is fed to you, trying to produce a picture that will make sense. Because we want meaning. We want this story to make sense somehow. And stories started being told in communities. We tried to explain why things are the way they are. These stories were retold, and they became very dear to the communities in which they were told. The values that they communicated formed the communities in which they were told. Some of them eventually were written down. Some of them became revered, even holy. But we need to recognize where these stories come from. These stories are often just a projection of our own fears, an interpretation of what we think happened, trying to find meaning in the chaos of life. I'm going to get into it a bit deeper, but not everything in life has meaning. Chaos is real. And sometimes we don't want to hear that. We want to know that God is in control of everything that happens, and therefore it has meaning and it has purpose. But there's different storylines that move through the scripture. And what makes your life story so beautifully significant is that it happens in the midst of chaos. Chaos is real. Let me take it further. Let me show you how language is related to the events of your life, to time. Now, time. What is time? It seems like our time is broken up in past, present, and future. And when we start looking at the past, does your past objectively still exist? No, what is past is exactly that. It is past. It no longer exists. The only place where your past still exists is in your memory. The only place in which the future exists is in your anticipation. It has no objective reality. That brings many people to the conclusion that the only thing that is real is the present. But how big is the present? Is it a day? Is it an hour? Is it a second? When we break it down to how big is the present is but the movement from a past that no longer exists into a future that does not exist yet. So time by itself is very insubstantial. Time by itself cannot give our stories meaning, give our lives meaning. You see, every day we are overwhelmed with an enormous amount of events that happens to us. And we constantly working on that information, drawing together, trying to fit it into a pattern that gives us a sense of continual identity and continual value of a meaningful story. Papa, help me make this as clear and as beautiful and as relevant as possible. See, language has its very origin in the fact that we have experienced events so beautiful that we want to preserve its meaning, or events so disturbing that we want to hide its reality. And language became the symbols, the tool we use with which to delve for its meaning or with which to hide its horror. Now, language, it's like an artist who sees a magnificent scene and the sun is just setting, and especially the impressionistic kind of artists, they try to capture the light, the movement, the wind, and they want to capture it on this canvas so that long after that sunset, that event is actually gone, this painting would still capture the feeling, the movement, the moment. And this is what language does. We are aware that there is value beyond the temporal. Language became the tool with which we extract that eternal value from events that are so temporal. Because the events pass away. They're gone. The only thing that remains is our stories. It's our language. And our stories, they take on a personality and a character of their own. Especially when our stories of the horror or the pain we experienced. Because, even evil is not something that we first and foremost experience as something theoretically and abstract. People experience evil in the face of the death of a loved one, the untimely abuse of a child. Something horrific really happens. And people experience evil in the reality of what happens. And when we start telling stories to hide or preserve the significance of that moment, and especially when those stories are given over to later generations who have not experienced what we experienced, the stories develop a personality and a character of their own, and continues to haunt us, and they become ever more separated from the events they used to describe. And so our stories became twisted. Our ideas, many of our stories was formed within the furnace of humanity's confusion. And the only way in which we can find greater meaning in our lives is to start deconstructing those stories. And that's scary because it means that we enter the waters of chaos again. We love our certainty. Now, certainty is often just a sign of insecurity. And doubt is often a sign of honesty. Faith is not the same as certainty. Faith grows in the soil of contradiction. Faith doesn't happen in the absence of contradiction. Faith happens right in the midst of confrontation and contradiction. But what we want is not faith, we want certainty. The certainty that's cultivated in the laboratory of our dogmas. So we tell our stories. We've told many stories about God, about ourselves. Some are monstrous, some are beautiful. They are all subjective. They've all been interpreted because you see, two people can experience the exact same event and go away with two very different experiences. Why? Because we interpret what has happened to us. You don't see things the way they are. You see things the way you are. And so, to a very large extent, we all live in the reality of our own illusions. And so the scripture comes to start help us deconstruct our stories. And it is scary. It means that we've got to ask questions. We've got to become honest in our beliefs. And we can do it with the confidence that truth remains true no matter what angle you look at it. Truth is not afraid of our questioning. And as we deconstruct it and we enter this place of uncertainty, the only thing that sustains us in here is the one truth that God is love. And He wants to make you aware of things that you've not been aware of. Because you see, you might have assigned value to events that happened in your life, a value that they never really had. And you might have completely missed the significance of some events in your life. And so God comes to redeem your life, not just your present and your future. He even robs evil of its claim on your past. Because the gospel comes and offers you an alternative memory. Gospel comes and says, the things you remember and how you've interpreted it and what's happened to you, there's a deeper meaning, there's a greater value, there's a beauty in it that you might have missed. Your present does not have to be just the sum total of the regrets and the fears and the pains of the past. God can give you a vision of your life. A vision that results in one conclusion: gratitude. Here you are. You're still alive. You're breathing. You're conscious. Count it all joy. In other words, counting means you do a sum. And if the conclusion is not joy, you've done the sum wrong. There's a way in which God can allow you to see through His eyes. You see, this is where the eternal God comes to gather all the scattered pieces of our lives, our events, and form a coherent whole, to start showing you a pathway through the chaos. You see, often in the face of tragedy, we are so quick with our explanations. How horrific it is to tell a parent who's just lost their child, well, I can tell you why that happened. Now, either you or them or what didn't apply this principle, and etc., and that's why they did. How insensitive, how arrogant. Now, there's things in this life that really are evil. And evil by its very nature is illogical. It cannot be explained. And to explain it too shallowly and too quickly is just an attempt for you to retrieve back into your illusionary world where everything has meaning and everything has purpose, and therefore I'm all right. Now, there's things that are really chaotic, meaningless, purposelessness. Just, It's real. But what the gospel comes to do is to help you find a story in the midst of chaos. You see, God's goodness does not consist of his ability to prevent evil. You can agree with that, because if that is what God's goodness was, then there would be no evil in this world, or alternatively, God is rather evil because of the things that happens. But God's goodness does not consist in his ability to prevent evil. God's goodness consists in his ability to continually open up new opportunities to live, to laugh, to love, despite evil. He's the God of infinite possibilities. And so your present can become the glorious memory of a God who continually makes all things new, who is with you in the midst of your hell, your suffering, your confusion. And your future is no longer bound to repeat a fallen past. Hey, don't hold yourself captive to memories that limits you. The gospel comes to introduce you to alternative memory. The gospel comes to say you are much larger than the stuff you remember about yourself. This is why Jesus in John 8:16-17 in the Message translation, it's so beautiful. He says, my judgments are true because I do not make them out of the narrowness of my own experience. Wow. If God incarnate can say, my experiences are too narrow to make meaningful conclusions from, how much more must you know that your past has not revealed a fraction of who you are? But I make my judgments out of the largeness of the Father. There's someone else who defines me, who wants to retell my story. And so the stories that we've told of man, of ourselves, of God, has often just been reflections and projections of our own fears, of our own confusion. Is there a way for us to break through this limitation of our own understanding? Is there a way for us to hear a voice that is not just our own reflection? Is there a God that is not just our own projections of what we hope for? See, this is what God comes to do in the person of Christ. He breaks through the limitation of our own understanding. He comes and he says, yes, no one has known the Father. Through your own effort, through your own study, through your own diligent searching, none of us have known him. We have all been stuck in our own reflections. But here he breaks through. He breaks through the limitations of our religion, our philosophy. And he comes to reveal his Son in us, so that we can once again hear a word with which we resonate, a word that has its origin not in ourselves, but what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, what no imagination can conceive. He reveals. He reveals by his Spirit. I want to tackle one concept that has been one of our projections about who God is. And I want to show you how Jesus turns that concept upside down. one of the most basic concepts that started developing about God. And it happens as man was overwhelmed with the vastness, the greatness, the beauty of this story that we are part of, this creation that we find ourselves in. We look into the sky and we just see a whole different world, something way beyond us. And so the concept of God's transcendence, of God's otherness, of the greatness of God became a very prominent part of the story that we told about God. This story of God's transcendence, of how different God is, was very much emphasized again when early Christianity started debating with Hellenistic philosophers. Now, in Hellenistic philosophy, their understanding of time and eternity had a certain form, and I want to quickly go through that. Plato speaks of time as something that, and we don't even know to what extent these thoughts have influenced our Christian doctrines. I quickly want to just give you a history of that and then show you how Jesus transformed that concept. But in Hellenistic thought, in Plato's ideas that there is a perfect spiritual world in which the perfect form of everything appears, and whatever we see physically in this world is just a copy of what is perfect. But every copy is not quite as perfect as the original. So this eternal realm is the place of eternal, changeless truth. Now, in early Christianity's debate with Hellenistic philosophy and thoughts, we very quickly adopted these ideas. And the God who is eternal became the changeless, motionless, eternal God, the God that does not change. Now, in theological terms, they use a very big word, impassible. Now, impassible means that he remains unaffected. He is not changed by the temporal. That, yes, in Jesus, he kind of, a part of God comes to experience what it's like to be human, but God himself remains changeless. Sovereign is another concept that comes out of this, because in this eternal realm there is no past or future. It's basically everything is present to God. So God is omniscient. He knows every detail of everything from beginning to end. Now, these are all theoretical, abstract descriptions of who God is that has become very real in much of our theology. Now, how shall I approach this? Jesus comes to mess up some of our best ideas about God. He just completely ruins it. Because if Jesus is the self-revelation of who God is, then much of our philosophical ideas about who God is just crumbles. For instance, when Jesus speaks about the eternal realm before the world was created, he doesn't speak about the changeless, motionless place of eternal truth, because the other way in which you can state that is it's static and boring. So when Jesus speaks about this eternal realm, it is not a changeless, motionless place of theoretical truth. Now he says in John 17:24, I wish you guys could have been with me where I am. Before this world was made, where the Father gave me glory and love, and there's this dynamic exchange of relationship. Jesus reveals that eternity is dynamic. It's full of movement. It's full of relationship. And this has got huge implications for the very nature of God, because in the concept of God's transcendence, impossibility, it means that God wasn't really ever fully involved in his creation. His creation was something he made, and he wound it up like a clock and left it there while he continued in his eternal, unaffected state. But the way Jesus starts describing God is a God of dynamic movement. And you see, in the Platonic idea of eternity versus time, they basically define time as everything that eternity is not. Eternity is changeless. Time is continually changing. Eternity carries on forever in the same state. Time is where everything continually moves and changes. You can't put your foot into the same river twice because the water has flown. And so the relationship between time and eternity becomes very negative in that concept of time and eternity. But Jesus gives us a concept of eternity that makes its relationship with time very positive. Because eternity is not changeless, it's movement, it's dynamic. And therefore time becomes the created equivalent of the uncreated movements within God. So it's not opposite, it's just a mirror reflection of movement. Of a dynamic being. In other words, the Hebrew concept of God, it doesn't begin with this abstract theory of an eternal one out there, but their concept of God is his faithfulness throughout time. In other words, he's in it. He's in our time. He's in our world. Yes, God began before creation. He's the creator before he made anything. But once he created, he is absolutely bound to his creation. He's the one that makes every atom spin. The one that makes every molecule function. He is present. He is immanent in all creation. Now, the other concept that started developing out of this understanding of eternity as being a moment that encompasses all of the present and the future and the past in just a present awareness is the concept of God's omniscience and the fact that he sovereignly knows the detail of every event or thing that will ever happen from beginning to end. Now, you can continue to believe that, please. Don't feel that I'm forcing you into another kind of understanding. As I tried to show in the previous session, there are different lines of thought throughout the scripture, different things. There's one scripture that says, I'm the Lord, I change not. And then there's another scripture where God says, oh boy, I've been too mad at them. I'm sorry. I'm going to kill them. I'm made a mistake. And then Moses argues with him and God says, okay, I'll change my mind. I'll repent. That's all in Exodus. So is God changeless or is he repenting? And so there's different lines of thought running throughout the scripture. And I want to just throw out a different concept of God's omniscience and about how God plans and knows about the future. Because the typical idea that time is something that really exists in terms of past and future and it's all present to God, That's very difficult to justify in many areas of just logical thought. But what it also does is it makes us rather passive, seeing that God has got it all planned. And secondly, can you imagine a life in which nothing ever surprises you because you're already aware of every detail that has ever happened? Can God be surprised? If he can't, it must be the most boring existence there is. You're very quiet this morning. You're all thinking, where are you going with this? We're not quite sure we agree with this yet, but keep on going. Okay. Let me give an example. Marianne and myself, we're constantly in the process of planning where we next, how we get there. And last year we did a 10-week tour and we visited 10 countries throughout Europe. And many of them were with new groups that we've never been with before. And so we had great joy in our anticipation of doing this trip and in our planning of doing this trip. But when we actually went on the tour, the joy of actually living the experience that we planned was much greater than our joy of anticipation. And part of what made the joy greater was that stuff happened that we did not plan. You see, God, of course, God knows the end that he has in mind for us. Of course, God has a plan and a purpose, but he is not in control of every detail of how we get there. That's right. Yeah. Of course, he takes great joy in anticipating the life he has for you, but the joy of participating in your life to get there, for him to be surprised by who you are, is part of what makes life exciting for God. In other words, God doesn't have a perfect plan for your life in which every event has got purpose and meaning. No, God gives you a blank paper. He says, I want to get to a place where we are absolutely in union, in love. I've got the end goal. But here's a blank piece of paper. I want you to decide what meaning your life has. I want you to decide what road you take to get there. And I'm going to back it. I'm going to be with you in it. Even if you take a detour through hell, I won't abandon you there. I'll be with you. Because my purposes and my plans, God's end goal is without repentance. I'm going to be with you until we get there. But how we get there, God is much more trusting, much more open, much more exciting than the boringly predictable being we've imagined. You see, if God planned, purposed every detail of your existence and knows the whole thing from beginning to end, have experienced it already, what's the use of even creating it? He's had the whole experience before it began. You see, maybe God's omniscience, his knowing all things, is not his ability to perfectly predict every event to come, Maybe his omniscience is the fact that he is so involved, so present in every event as it unfolds, because he has so fully committed himself to your existence that he is there when it happens. Therefore, he knows all things because he's present as it unfolds. But the future does not exist yet. And therefore, there's nothing to know about the future except the anticipation that he starts stirring in us for the possibilities of what the future can be. I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is your future has not been perfectly planned, every detail determined. The good news is your future has not been perfectly planned, every detail determined. God is so excited about your life. He wants to surprise you, and he'd appreciate a few surprises from you. He's so open. He's the God of infinite possibilities. He's the God who makes all things new. Just when we think we've got this whole thing figured out. Just when we think we've got this whole story from beginning to end, we've got it sewn up together. Okay, I'm going to close with this. How much time do I have? Do I have another 10 minutes or something? 10, okay. Just when we thought we have this whole thing neatly sewn up, we've got the story, because we've got to have a story that gives us meaning. And so the story that we typically tell in our Christian understanding is we had a perfect beginning where nothing was wrong, everything was what we dream perfection to be. I mean, Adam and Eve, no problems, no hassles, walking about naked in the garden because even the animals are all vegan. There's no problem. We've got this perfect beginning. Then a cosmic mess up happens. We start this spiral downwards. God takes pity on us, gives us a few safety nets like the Lord to kind of help us survive, until Jesus comes, who makes that perfect world possible again. But if you've looked around you, it's not quite as perfect as we imagine Eden was. Spitting all over here. And so basically, Jesus makes things a bit better. But we kind of hoping that heaven will one day again be as perfect as we began. So we've got this perfect beginning, this perfect end, and that makes us feel a bit more comfortable in between these two perfect poles. Maybe the stories we've told ourselves, maybe we've interpreted them a bit wrong. Maybe the stories were wrong, and maybe our interpretations were wrong. For instance, let me give you one idea. In Hebrew, when you want to give the stronger version of a word, like we've got good, better, best, you don't have that type of different words. What you would say is, if something's good, you would say it's tuf. If it's very good, it's tuf, tuf. If it's perfect, it's tuf, tuf, tuf. Now, 3 repetitions of the word is the best you can get. For instance, the word age, time. We've often interpreted it eternity, but it's normally just age. But when it says age upon age, that's a very long time. When it says age upon age upon age, that is like as long as you can get. And that word is almost never used. It's just long periods of time. Now, the story of Genesis, when God creates, what does he say? This is tuf. This is good. Not perfect. Good. When he creates man, he says, this is very good. This is tuf tuf. It's still not perfect, but it's very good. But our Platonic ideas of eternal, changeless perfection leads us into places of unrealistic expectations of what life and eternity is all about. You see, what makes your life so significant is not that it has no contradictions. It's not that you have no confrontations. It's not that evil does not exist. It's that despite evil, the God of infinite possibilities always shows up to give you new opportunities to laugh in the face of evil, to love in the face of pain, to live despite whatever disaster happened. So, I'm going to close off. Maybe we had no perfect beginning in the Eden type of concept. I think if there's any perfect beginning, it's the beginning that Jesus speaks about, the beginning before creation, where in this relationship of Father, Son, and Spirit, they imagine a creature that can participate with them in that fellowship. You see, and God in this place of dynamic movement of joy between Father, Son, God is a relationship. The terms Father, Son, Spirit, they are obviously very significant, but God uses every kind of term to help you understand that He's in relationship with you. Sometimes He says, I'm your friend. Sometimes He says, I'm your brother. Sometimes He says, I'm your sister. I'm your mother. I'm your father. Whatever helps you understand that I am in relationship with you. And so God in the beginning is a relationship of dynamic exchange of love and joy. And it's in this place that God doesn't imagine what kind of creature can we invent that will irritate us for all eternity. What kind of being can we bring into being that will just make us mad as hell? No, it's in this place of fellowship, this place of intimacy, that God, this place in which love is exchanged between like, because the Father, Son, Spirit, it's that likeness. In this place, God has an idea. What if we extend our love beyond ourselves to another? What kind of being can we invent so much like ourselves that we can invite them into this fellowship and their presence will not reduce this joy, but enhance it? You see, if there's a perfect beginning, it is in the Logos, the imagination, the dream of God. But how we get there is a blank page. And it's exciting. Amen. It's exciting to have a blank page. We have become just so absolutely overwhelmed with how God backs whatever we decide to do. Now, there was a time where you were so nervous. God, should I wear this shirt or that shirt? This tie or that? Is this God's plan? And eventually, what's your plan for my life? Eventually, I just heard God say, please stop searching for my plan for your life. I was horrified. I thought that's a good Christian thing to do. And He said, no, just realize that your life is my plan. I want you to live. And in this place of relationships, desires start to form. And whatever this desire is, I can just say, hey, Papa, I'd love to. I remember about 2.5, 3 years ago when we first came to America and we flew over a few places. I remember sitting in an aircraft looking out the window, and I was reading a scripture, and it's in Luke, I think in the Message translation, it says, hey, tell me what you want. Be specific. And I kind of looked out and I said, we love traveling everywhere. We love ministering everywhere across the world. But Papa, let me be specific. I would love for you to open the opportunity for us to be able to stay in this country for a longer period of time so that we can get a base where we can unpack our suitcases. Now that was 2.5 years ago. It was such a joy coming in this year after a long process. But with the visas that's necessary for us to stay here for a few years and find a base. And that was just me chatting to my Papa, saying, no, but Papa, I would love to have a base here for a little while. And there it is. It happens. But what a joy to have a God that's behind you and says, come on, decide how you want to live. Decide what meaning your life has. And there's nothing that can fill an event with greater meaning, with greater significance than love. No matter what circumstances or situation you are in, I guarantee you, you have an opportunity to love. And when you love, God is being Himself in you. God is living life to the full. God is enjoying existing in the form of man when you love. So I try not to be too theoretical or too abstract. I try and make these things as relevant as I can. At the same time, I realize we've got many theoretical ideas that's been planted in us since childhood, of God knowing everything that's going to happen, of God being sovereignly in control of everything. And the idea I want to give you is maybe God is more open, more free, more exciting than what we imagined Him to be. And He involves His creation in the act of creating reality. And He's telling you, what life do you want to live? You see, Jesus comes, and what is so offensive about Him is He doesn't introduce us to a strong, impossible, transcendent God. What is so offensive about Him is He introduces us to a God who's not interested in controlling and manipulating your life and determining your future, but a God who comes to put Himself in your hands and says, you can do with me whatever you want to. You can even murder me if you want to. But I'm not here to control your life. I'm here to be with you and always create new opportunities to live and laugh and love until you get it. But that is the purpose of living. To laugh a bit. No one's made it out of this alive yet. We can just have fun on this journey. Love on this journey. Ah, glory. Thank you, Papa, for just this glorious freedom